Well, hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for the Best of Bless. I have been looking forward to this for a while. My name is Michelle Sanchez, and I serve as Executive Minister of Make and Deepen Disciples for the Evangelical Covenant Church. If you're not familiar with Bless, let me just give you a quick overview of what it is. Bless is 5 missional practices that allow us to participate in the strategy that God gave Abraham to reach the world. And I will bless you, and you will be a blessing. That's from Genesis chapter 12. So this is an acronym also that stands for the practices of begin with prayer, listen with care, eat together, serve in love, and share the story. And as we engage in these practices together, we have the privilege of partnering with God to bless those who do not yet have a relationship with Him. So you can find out a lot more about how the covenant does bless at covchurch.org/bless. Now, we've been engaged in Bless initiatives for years, and at this point, we have had hundreds of covenant churches, thousands of participants. It has been so exciting. But many don't know how it all began. And actually, it began through a friendship and a partnership with Dave Ferguson. And Bless was really the brainchild of Dave and of his community. And he has been very generous to share the greatness of this idea with the covenant and beyond. I am so excited to have Dave with us today because we can truly have an amazing conversation about the best of Bless, best practices, some ideas. But really, friends, this is just going to be the beginning of a conversation. Hopefully today you'll get a taste, and then we're going to have more to come. So Dave Ferguson is an award-winning author, founding and lead pastor of Chicago's Community Christian Church, a missional multi-site community considered to be one of America's most influential churches. Dave is also the visionary for the International Church Planting Movement, New Thing, and the president of the Exponential Conference. And I also have to tell you, I'm so excited because Dave, he's had this in coming, but he has finally written his book on Bless. And so I really encourage you to find the book, to purchase it, to take a look. And again, we'll give you just a taste of that today. But most importantly for me, Dave is a friend and an incredible partner in mission. So we welcome you today, Dave.
Hey, it's good to be with you, Michelle.
Dave, I clearly brought out all of my Bless bling just for you.
Oh, I love it. You got the t-shirt, you got the virtual background, it's all happening. And I have to say too, that was a very, very kind introduction, but I do want to say on behalf of you and really the covenant, where we're going to talk about kind of where it came from and stuff. You all really took it to a whole nother place and a whole nother level, and really inspired and encouraged me to make sure we did write this book so other people would use it. So thank you for your leadership, and thank you to the Covenant denomination for their leadership in this movement. So way to go.
Oh, we have had so much fun with Bless, and we are just getting started. And hey, I should also mention, so this virtual background is from one of our covenant churches. I actually don't know which one, but somebody forwarded me this picture and I loved it. So if you're on today, good job, amazing decor. What our churches have been very creative with it. So, all right, so let's dive in. So just want to let everybody know roughly what we're going to be doing today. I've asked Dave to give us some background into Bless, kind of how it's impacted his church, his life, all of that. Then we're going to get into the best of Bless in terms of some best practices that we really want to share. And then we're going to talk about creating a culture of Bless. And honestly, this is where Dave and his ministry really shines because he comes up with creative ways to multiply. He wants to take everything exponential, right? So he comes up with some really helpful principles for creating cultures and not just initiatives. So very excited. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Okay, so Dave, please tell us, where did you come up with the idea for Bless?
Well, I think actually probably like you said, it really starts in Genesis, so I'm not sure I can take credit for the idea. I think our team came up with some real simple handles that I think really kind of mimic how Jesus blessed people through his life. that made it accessible. Part of it is my story, part of it's our church story. I think for me, I remember when I first became a Christ follower, I was like so fired up. I mean, when you first really get that God loves you unconditionally, relentlessly, passionately, I mean, that kind of grace is just transformational. And I was so excited about it that, of course, everybody needed to know about this.
Of
And
course.
I think in my eagerness, though, I mean, I probably started running over people, maybe even assaulting people. I mean, I was doing door-to-door evangelism. I would take it, do stuff in the streets. I actually started something in college called the Soul Winners Club. Anybody on here, please don't tell anybody I did that. But we started something like that, and I pretty much guilt tripped everybody in my college and my professors to go door to door. And I think what happened is we were answering a lot of questions that people weren't asking, and we were well intentioned, but it didn't go well. And then I kind of swung the other way as a church planner, where I'm going like, well, you know what? It's just going to be through my life, not a verbal witness, just through my life. And I think my neighbors thought I was a good guy, but I didn't see any of them become Christians.
Yeah.
And so it was really kind of those two extremes. And maybe one kind of thing that really opened my eyes. I remember it was a doctoral dissertation. We talk about this in the book. And embedded in it was this study called Blessers versus Converters. I know me and you have talked about this.
Mm-hmm.
And they sent 2 teams of missionaries to Thailand. And one team went just as the converters, and their sole ambition was to just convert people, kind of like me. The other went as they said, they called them the blessers, and they were just going to be a blessing wherever God sent them. Well, after 2 years of observing them, what they discovered was that when it came to the converters, as far as the difference they made in the community, what you'd call social capital, there was no difference. They left it the same way they found it. The blessers, though, there was actually measure of social capital. There was a betterment of the community because of their presence. But what was really surprising was that the converters, after 2 years, only saw 2 people come to follow Jesus, come to faith, where the blessers saw 100. It was like 50 to 1.
Wow.
And so in some ways, right back to Genesis 12, yeah, maybe this was God's strategy from the very beginning for us, how we're going to change the world is by being blessers. And so probably from my own experience, and then also those are the things that really kind of got the wheels turning.
Wow, I have been thinking a lot lately, especially in light of a lot of the challenges that we have faced in our country over the last year, about the importance of being a credible witness. So it's one thing to be a witness and say what we've seen, but it's another thing for our lives to reflect it. It's another thing for people, as you said, to build social capital so that our words have more meaning. And so I feel like that is something that Bless does inherently well, which is really exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, all right. So let's talk about Bless at your church. I have visited your church, and I took my whole team, the whole Make It Deep and Disciples team, to visit you. And I mean, you have Bless up on the wall. I mean, it is in huge letters. You cannot miss it. So clearly it's been part of your church, part of your community for many years. So tell us about that.
I think one of the things, our mission statement at Community is helping people find their way back to God. And we kind of lean into the story of the prodigal son or the waiting father. And we really feel like that's everyone's story. How do we help all people find their way back to God? And for a lot of years, we saw a lot of people, and we continue to see a lot of people come to faith, but it was really kind of like they would belong and then they would believe, which is great. And it would happen in our small groups. But we really, even though they were belonging, they believe, we didn't really have, and I love the way you talk about it too, intentional. We didn't have an intentional way to equip people to really share their faith. And so in many ways, where our mission statement was helping people find their way back to God, I think we were kind of hoping.
Right.
And I think what Bless did for us is it took our mission to the next level by really giving people an intentional way. Here's how you, with your friends, whether it's where you live or you work or you play, here's how you can, potential 5 steps process for how you can help them find their way back to God. And so that's what it did for us anyway.
Absolutely. Now, how did you keep Bless before people at your church? One of the things that I've been really cognizant of, we don't want this to just feel like a program and it's like, oh, you've done it. Oh, good, check the box. And next year we're going to do something else. So how did you keep it before your church? Do you preach on it regularly? How do you keep it from becoming old? That kind of thing.
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, we will annually do training with our leaders on this. So we do something called leadership community. So we do keep it in front of our leaders because we feel like our leaders, and we may get to some of this later on, are our primary culture creators. And we want to create a culture of blessing. So we keep it annually in front of our leaders, so our leadership community. But then we weave it throughout our teaching. And most years we'll actually set aside a whole series that we'll do on the blessed practices. Here's one of the things I would say to all the church leaders listening in too. When it comes to culture creation, and if you're trying to create a culture of blessing and where people are actually being intentional about using these blessed practices, it's about the time that you're getting bored talking about it. And you're going, oh my goodness, I can't believe Michelle's wearing the blessed t-shirt. I mean, we've been doing this for 5 years. Seriously. I'm telling you, about the time you get there and you're bored with it, that's when people are finally starting to get it. And I think a lot of us are kind of, we love new ideas, we love new thoughts, but I'm telling you, we have to just discipline ourselves to do this over and over and over and over again. So one of the things is, yes, in celebration services or worship services with our leaders who do it. But the other thing, and we may have some time for this later, that I think has made a big difference, and we're trying to do a better job of that, because I don't want to give the illusion we've got this figured out, is in our small groups. If you can start all of your small groups just with a simple question of who did you bless this week?
Mm.
And again, I think to your point, you don't want it to be a checklist. It can't be a guilt manipulative kind of thing. It needs to be a grace-filled thing. And if people are saying, yeah, I prayed for my neighbors, that's awesome. That is awesome. And you can say that 52 weeks in a row, that's awesome. But I think you can start your small groups, which is kind of the infrastructure, probably the strength of a lot of churches. And you may have Sunday school, you may have missional communities, whatever it is, that smaller expression. You start with who did you bless this week? That makes a big difference as far as keeping that really alive in people's minds throughout the week.
Dave, so one of the things I absolutely love is your focus on leadership development. Oh my goodness. Just that small insight that, if you want to create a culture, focus on the leaders, focus on the leaders, focus on the leaders. So you had another work that you wrote specifically about leadership development, The Hero Maker, right? Which really gets into the importance of that, not just for evangelism, but for everything. So I love that initiative, and it's something that we haven't yet quite talked about with Bless. The other thing I would just say for people is that, oh my gosh, so that insight, as soon as you're starting to get bored, that's when your people are probably just starting to get it. That's golden. And I've had to remind myself of that too.
And I so love a new idea, and I love the next thing. I mean, don't tell them any of this, but I mean, I know it's just
Yes.
90 of us here, but like there was a part of me, and this sounds bad, and I'll apologize for it. I kind of liked the last year because I got to try so many brand new things.
Different things.
Right. So that's energizing, but I think we do have to discipline ourselves. No, if we're trying to create a culture, we really want our people to don't forget, I mean, they're trying to keep their marriages together. They're trying to keep the bills paid. They're trying to keep the kids in school. There's a lot of things. If we can discipline ourselves to stay focused and keep them simple, like with these blessed practices, it makes a big difference for them.
And one thing I would say as well is, I've said since the start, like we are committed, the ECC is committed to Bless for at least 10 years. And, the idea being that I know this is true. I know that you need time to build culture. And so what we've said is every year we'll try to do something for you to keep this fresh, keep it before you, give you new ideas. But we're going to stick with it. We're going to be disciplined to stick with this for at least 10 years, if not more, God willing. So anyway, I'm in full agreement on that. Okay, so Dave, I would love you to share a blessed story. And now here's the thing, everyone, if you want to hear some blessed stories, you got to read the book. Read Dave's book. It's full of stories. Also I would love to do some future events with Dave where we may actually hear people share their stories themselves. Oh, yeah. But just as a little taste, Dave, can you tell us a quick story that you appreciate from Bless?
Yeah, one of the things we did for the Bless book too is because thanks to you and other folks who've led the way. I mean, we had, I interviewed you. And in fact, a number of people around the world who are using these and integrate their stories. But the story for me that really convinced me that Bless is not just a great way to build friendships, and that's really what we ought to focus on, but it is also a great way to help people find and follow Jesus. Yeah. I had a friend named Michael. Michael's a guy who, if you knew Michael, he's not the kind of guy who would ever show up at church just because it wouldn't be in his set of solutions for whatever was going on in his life. Just wouldn't. His background, he grew up in an abusive home, actually ended up leaving his house on his own while he was still in high school, got into college, was actually a D1 athlete, ran almost a 4-minute mile because he was a track star, and went to grad school on his own, kind of a self-made guy. Eventually started his own healthcare company, became president, did very well financially, all that kind of stuff.
Mm.
Well, our kids ran cross country and track together. And we both love our kids and we love cross country and track. And so we kind of hit it off. And so I add him to my list of 8 people that I'm praying for. So begin with prayer. And we're talking at the track meets and stuff, and even you travel. And so we're catching up. And so I'm getting to know him, the L of listen. And I remember there was a point in time, and I could take you almost to the spot where he actually pivoted the conversation. And he started talking about some stuff that was going on in his own life. He said, we should get together for breakfast sometime.
Wow.
And so we started getting together for breakfast. He liked different restaurants. He introduced me to different restaurants. But I'll never forget one breakfast where we're eating together. And he says to me, Dave, for 20 years, I felt like I needed to live 2 lives and not just one. And I asked him, and that's when he began to share the rest of his story. He had a friend in grad school named Jay, who was like his best friend. He'd actually been in Jay's wedding. He was hoping Jay would stand up in his wedding. They went for a ride together. Long story short, they got in a car accident. It was actually, Michael was held liable. It was his fault. Jay didn't make it. Jay died. And Michael didn't tell anybody about that except his wife for the next 20 years. So I'm having breakfast with him for the first time. He's telling me this story.
Wow.
And then he explains, he says, you know what? And for 20 years, I felt like I needed to live my life and Jay's life because I was responsible. So he's been carrying for 2 decades, this shame, this guilt. And so the serve part, really, for me, that was when I got to, it was just wide open there. Go explain how I'd found forgiveness in Jesus and how Jesus can even take our worst crap and redeem it for great good. And you should have seen, as he began to realize the lights, he even talked about it like he was carrying around a bag of bricks, how they would just like one at a time, it was like coming off and he was just finding himself free. And long story short, then I remember I got a chance to baptize him. And here's the thing, Michelle, and you'll appreciate this, and other church leaders will appreciate this too. There's sometimes when you get to see other people come to faith that have, been a part of your church, and that's awesome.
Yeah.
But it is, for me anyway, it's a totally different thing when it's like my friend that I've been with him the whole journey. And so I got a chance to baptize Michael, and to me, I got to see the blessed practices work all the way through. And that was when, for me, it was when like, wow, this is a great way to really help people find and follow Jesus.
I love it. One of the things that we have seen in the research, got some friends over at the Billy Graham Center for Evangelism, and they're doing great work.
Yep.
And one of the things that they've seen is if you really want to build a culture of evangelism in your church, it starts with the leader. And not just preaching about evangelism or encouraging it, but doing it in a way that others can imitate. And so, it's one thing, as you say, for people to raise their hand or whatever after a sermon, but it's another for you to actually live out the practices yourself and then share how you're doing that. That's the key to actually creating that kind of culture.
Yeah, I almost more than I do think of myself as a pastor, but in addition to that, I would say, I also try to think of myself, okay, Dave, you're a culture creator. You're a culture creator. And I think if church leaders think of themselves, I'm a culture creator, and that people are going to reproduce what I do. And so I really, and I don't get it right all the time, but I'm working on it. But you kind of have to ask, okay, what do I want the people in my church to do? Okay, then how do I embody that? It seems pretty simple, but if I do it, then maybe then they can do it, and we can share the stories and encourage them in that direction.
Amen. Amen, brother. Okay. So let's go now to talking specifically about the best of Bless in terms of some of the practices and tools. And actually, I have not said this. I think that my colleague did type this into the chat, but we will have time at the end for questions.
Okay.
So as you have questions, please type them in, and we'll make sure that we get to questions in the last 10 to 15 minutes of our time today. But yes, so Dave, all right. So with each of the letters, I know we could have a whole session, all right? And in your book, you've got a whole chapter on each one. So how about this? Can you choose a few of the letters and share with us some best practices or a tool, just something that people might find useful?
Yeah, sure. That'd be great. One of the things that we tried to do with the book is make it, just as practical as we possibly could. So throughout the book, we actually have, from people like Michelle and others, we have like 18 different what we call blessed basics. Like here is like a tip for people who've been living it out either personally or in their church or their denomination. So we have that. We have blessed stories from like we talked about. The other thing, in addition to these 5 practices, we also give you 5 different tools. And each of these tools are so that you actually have you could literally read the chapter on Begin with Prayer and do it right then. So for example, the tool for Begin with Prayer, we borrowed from Jay Pathak and Dave Runyon. And if you haven't read their book, Who's My Neighbor? It's a great book. It dovetails brilliantly with the blessed.
That's great.
Yeah, and so we have this kind of little Who's My Neighbor map, which has your house or your apartment right at the center, and then basically it has 8 blanks, like the people live around you, and ask, hey, what are the names of your neighbors? And so learn the names of your 8 neighbors and then pray for them. And and for me, one of the ways that I do it is like this is my journal, and right here at the bottom, I just kind of make it a discipline to write bless, and then there's 8 of my neighbors. Actually, I think I added a 10th, 9th and 10th this morning that I'm praying for. And so we give you that tool. So and it's really great for you to give to the people in your church. Let me pick another one. Oh, another one that I kind of like too is like the eat one. It was just a simple little deal that we made up. It's kind of a meal calendar, and it just puts in front of you, here's a whole week where we suggest you have 28 opportunities to actually be with people, and 21 of them are breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and then we actually added 7 more because maybe you have coffee or dessert. And so you can take a look at your week and just go like, okay, I have potentially 28 different opportunities for building relationships with my neighbors.
Yeah.
And how do you go, well, how am I going to pick 2 or 3 of those, or even one of those every week to go like, because that's when I'm going to connect with this person, see if I could. So it's a simple tools like that. And but what we try to do with each of those is give you one tool for every practice. So there's real clear ways. Okay, now I know how to actually implement this.
I love that. One other thought on E that I want to share. Okay, and we're going to get into this next about blessing during a pandemic. So obviously, it's harder to eat together right now. Okay, and it will be for a while. It will not be forever, but it is harder now. But a couple thoughts. I have found, at this point, people are so used to doing everything on Zoom. I had a book club going for a while. We meet in person over dinner, and that was pre-COVID. Then COVID hit, didn't meet for a while. These were just women in my neighborhood. But now, at the beginning, it was hard to imagine doing that over Zoom. But now it's all we do. So I reached out and said, hey, why don't we just meet over? Let's just do it over Zoom. And we had a great time. We just did it and had a great time. So seriously, you can suggest we can do a meal or we can just hang out, over Zoom, because that's what everybody does now. And then here's one other thought, Dave. As part of our youth material for Bless, we changed the E to eat or experience, which is kind of an interesting twist we could talk about. But obviously, like kids can't control, necessarily who they eat with all the time. But having experiences together, they can think about ways to do that. And so that's another kind of expansion, in COVID. It's like eat or experience. What are some things you can do to eat or experience together with others?
Yeah, I mean, for kids, I mean, experience with like just games that they play online with each other.
Exactly.
Exactly right. That's brilliant. I love it.
So yeah, all right. So again, more tools you can find in the book.
Yeah.
All right, so let's.
I'll go ahead and put that in there because we do in the appendix, because ended up writing part of this as code. So we actually have an appendix kind of added chapter, kind of how to bless during a pandemic. If anybody wants to get that.
You know what? That is fabulous. And I would love to share that because that's where we're at right now.
I'll tell you what, let's do this, Michelle, because we can do this. If anybody who's listening just wants that chapter, let's figure out a way. You can give them my email address. We can just send them that one simple appendix chapter if they want access to it now, because hopefully this is going to be over by June or May here, right?
Yep.
So
Yep.
we still got a few more weeks, so maybe that'd be helpful.
I love it. Okay, so let's do this. We'll send out a follow-up email to everyone who's registered today. We'll make sure we get you that chapter on blessing during a pandemic. So yes, somebody's saying thank you. You're welcome. So let's talk about that at least a little bit right now, and just as you and your community have morphed everything you do to this pandemic we've been through, how have you morphed blessed?
I mean, I think one of you're talking about during the pandemic in particular.
Yeah, pandemic, before the pandemic, how have you continued to live out blessed as a community?
Well, I mean, I guess particularly as I think about during the pandemic, personally, I know one of the first things that I'll have to give my wife credit for this. I mean, one of the things that Sue did is she developed a text thread with all of our neighbors. And I mean, we had some of our neighbors over for a watch party, but none of them have actually been to our church, and not on a regular basis. But she started a text thread with them, just kind of like, hey, let's just kind of check in on each other. And that also gave us the opportunity to begin with prayer and to listen. And so
that's a great idea. Simple.
And our next door neighbors, Nikki and Ray, we found out they were going to have a baby. Once in a while, I knew he was totally amped about the whole thing. I check in with Ray, going, hey, how's it going? And then when they did, we took a meal over to them, and we didn't stay and eat because that didn't work during the pandemic, but we did get to share a meal. And so there are creative things like that we've done to try to do it during this season.
That's great. And something else I've been thinking about is that the future is hybrid. So at this point, like one day this will end, but so much of our life and ministry has now gone. We can do this virtually. And so the future is going to look a lot more hybrid than it did before, online or virtual plus in person. And so I've started to ask the question, how am I blessing people in a hybrid way? So I don't want it to be that I'm only blessing people in person. How am I also blessing people virtually? And we have to get creative with that, but we can do it,
Well, and I think I could not agree with you more, and we could do a whole nother hour on hybrid, because I think you're absolutely right about that being the future. But maybe this kind of dovetails what we were just talking about. We just had a year of getting to practice, and so don't forget. So, like, even the people that want to get this extra chapter on how to bless during a pandemic, we could probably a year later change it to how to bless people digitally and sell it as a chapter, because it's still true, but it's true for a different reason. So I think we've had practice in the last year, so don't forget how we've done it, and let's continue to do it and continue to lean into that. Yes.
And the reality is that there's so many people who have been reached virtually that would never have been reached before, or that it's just opened up new vistas, and that we don't want to lose that,
right?
As things sort of go back to normal, quote unquote. Okay. Hey, listen. So the other big challenge we've had is racial challenges over the last year. And I'm just wondering about like the connection between bless and justice, racial reconciliation. Do you see any connections?
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to probably defer to you, really. I mean, because what you've done with that Bless and Living Color is a great example. Why don't you? I mean, for people who don't know about that,
Sure.
about that, because, and I can tell you a little bit about some things we're doing, but I think you ought to plug that because that's a great tool.
So yeah, so one of the things that we realized is that um, the call that Abraham had and the call that Jesus has given us to be a blessing to the world were actually always multi-ethnic calls. They were always multi-ethnic calls. You will be a blessing to all the nations. And then, Jesus, make disciples of all the nations, and then Acts, they were always at their core. Don't just bless people like you, but bless across boundaries of difference. The challenge is how easily we forget that, how our default tends to be stick with those who are like us, right? And then of course, in a broken world, there's all kinds of, because of racism, there's all kinds of tensions, and oh my goodness, there's just so much there. But it is an integral part of being a blessing. It is an integral part of the original call. And so, yes, over the last year, one of the things that we've done is put together Bless in Living Color. And again, I consider it really just to be a beginning, but it's a 10-day devotional course on multi-ethnic evangelism. You can sign up for it, comes straight to your inbox every day with some lessons, some scripture, inspiration for you, and some tools. And so anyway, yeah, so Dave, we were excited to expand on what you did with that.
One of the things, kind of dovetailing off that too, one of the things that my own small group has done just in the last 5 weeks, we're actually finishing it up right now. Are you familiar with Undivided? Chuck Mingo and Troy Jackson, their program? No. It's a brilliant program that comes out of Crossroads Church in Cincinnati. Both of them are super bright guys. And so my small group is going through it. And so basically they put you together in a intentionally multicultural setting with people of other ethnicities, other race, and they help facilitate conversations that you might not normally have to really bring about racial reconciliation, but maybe more importantly, racial solidarity. How do we actually have each other's back? So, I mean, some of the things that I would say, maybe it doesn't directly correlate with the blessed practices, but certainly came out of the kind of the spirit of trying to be a blessing and live this out. That was one thing for us. And the other thing was we started something called justice deposits, but that's probably another topic for another time.
Ooh, that's a teaser. I want to hear more about that.
You would love it.
Okay, thank you so much, Dave. So let's talk about creating a culture of bless now, creating a culture of bless. Ultimately, in order to get the best of bless, it has to not just be a program, it has to be a paradigm that shapes a whole culture. So how do we do that?
Yeah, I think this is the thing that when I was thinking about the people of the Covenant Church, where they're already familiar with the practices, I was thinking it might be the most valuable thing we talk about, because this is how you can actually create a culture. Let me give you a definition. This is the definition I like to use for culture, and it's this: spontaneous, repeated patterns of behavior. Wordy, so I'll say it again. Spontaneous, repeated patterns of behavior. And basically what it is when the people in your church become unconsciously competent, when it's just kind of like, no, that's just who they are. When they see the orange, moving truck pulling in next door, they go like, okay, someone else I'm going to add to my list. I'm going to begin to pray for. Yeah. It's like that's just, now it's part of who they are. They don't have to be reminded. That's when you create a culture, that spontaneous, repeated patterns of behavior. Like the Michael Kinney story, my friend I told. When you see those things just spontaneously happening, you have a culture of bless. I think Jane has a graphic here that she created for us that I think will be of help. So if we use that as a definition, spontaneous, repeated patterns of behavior, how do we actually make that happen? Especially when it comes to bless. How do we get that to just spontaneously happen over and over again? So that it's happening with, people who are in their 60s and also people in their 30s. It's happening with our students. And we've really developed this kind of culture. I would say there's three things you need to focus on. And that's what we have in this graphic here. The first thing is the values. Okay. You want to have the values of bless. And when I think of talking about values, I'm talking about the understanding of your head, but also the passion in your heart. So you understand the theologically, what we've already kind of established way back in Genesis 12, that Jesus said, no, God told Abraham, I'm going to bless you and then you're going to bless others. And there's a conviction in our head about that. But there's also a passion in our heart that that's the way it should be.
Yes.
There's a little bit of, kind of a fire in your bones about this thing, that, man, we've got to live this out. Those are the values. So the values are probably grounded in, or should be grounded in, really good theology. All right. So you looked at other places like Matthew 28 or Acts 1:8 or those kind of things. So those, at the core of it, are your values. Then the second ring, if you're trying to create a culture of bless, is not only have the values, but you want to have the narrative. Now, there's two words that I would use to describe narrative. One is stories, and the second one is language. Stories and language make up the narrative. We'll start with language. I'm going to try something. We didn't practice this, so we'll see how this works.
Okay.
Michelle, do you ever eat at Chick-fil-A?
Occasionally I do, yes.
Okay, occasionally you do. So if you go into Chick-fil-A and you order something and you say thank you very much to them, what do they say back to you?
Oh, is this a Chick-fil-A specific question?
Yes, it is.
Oh, I have no idea.
Okay.
I've been there like twice.
Okay, so that wouldn't be fair. But I bet
it's where I grew up. It's just I didn't have exposure, Dave.
well,
I'm sorry to fail you on this example.
Okay. Most people, if they've been there, they know that they always say my pleasure. And I think they must, because from Atlanta, it's based out of there in the South. Yeah. No matter, even if you're in Chicago, where I am, they still say my pleasure.
My pleasure. Okay.
My pleasure. It's a part of their language. Actually, my son worked there for a little bit. And I said, did they like teach everybody to say my pleasure? And he's like, no, it didn't come up in any of the training at all. But it's kind of like it's just a part of the culture. You get enculturated into it. And so next time you go, you can. I actually play a game sometimes. Sometimes I'll play a game to see like how many times I can get them to say my pleasure. Oh. I think the record is 14. So for anybody else out there, if you want to see if you can break the record, you can let me know.
I love it. That's
back to the point. Part of culture is narrative, and the two words for narrative are language, and strong cultures have a language. And what you have with bless is you have a whole set of language, and that is really, really powerful. But the other thing you have to have that makes up the narrative are stories. My hunch is probably one of the reasons that Michelle asked me to tell a story at the beginning is because stories, they not only sharpen the truth about something, but they also pull at your heart. And narratives is partly stories. And so you want to tell stories. And again, that's why as a senior leader or as a part of a staff, if you can tell the stories from your own life, that has huge impact. So if you're trying to create a culture of bless, you got to hold the values. You need to create a narrative, which is about language and stories. But here's the last part. And the last part is the behaviors. Now, what's great about this is we actually give you, here are the 5 practices, right? 5 missional practices. So you have the behaviors. What happens with most churches, and the reason that they don't see evangelism happen, in my opinion, and Michelle, you're more of an expert on this than me, and you can kind of tell me what you think. Mm-hmm. I think that most all churches hold the value. Yeah, this is theologically true, and man, that's the way it should be, right? They even have some of the narrative because they have some language they got from the Bible, or even some stories that they told, or maybe stories they picked up from other people that they teach about on Sunday, whether they're their own or somebody's. You always have to have a story.
Yeah.
But what they don't have is they don't have the behaviors that they're actually living at themselves. And so here's what happens, leaders. Think about this. When you're trying to communicate and change a culture, if you only share the values, teaching biblical values, and the narrative, biblical stories, but you don't actually live out the behaviors yourself, what you're actually implicitly doing is saying, you know what? You only have to hold the values. You only have to tell stories. You don't actually have to do it because I don't even do it. and you don't say it out loud, but your life exposes that. And I think that's what happens in a lot of our churches. Yeah, we're excited about evangelism. Yeah, we tell the stories of evangelism, but I'm not doing it. And part of it is because maybe we don't know how to do it. But if I'm not doing it, then then you are actually implicitly creating a culture that says you only have to know it, you only have to talk about it, but you don't actually have to do it. So when you put all three of those things together, particularly you as a leader, when you hold that value, when you tell those stories, and then you are doing those behaviors yourself, you become a culture creator. And I'll give this to you too, a little extra too. It starts, I think, with you, but then if you can enroll that next level of leadership, and it might be I'd say your staff team, like small group leaders, your ministry leaders, your student ministry leaders, your kids leaders, your artists, when you get them actually doing it too, if you're familiar with the innovation curve, okay,
Yeah.
change happens. I mean, now you're talking about the top like 17 to 20%. You get them doing it, okay, not only valuing it, not only telling stories about actually doing it. I'll tell you what, that's when change happens, and that's when you create a culture.
I love this.
Blessing. So that simple model has been super helpful to me. Hopefully that's helpful to people listening in too. But that's how I think you can create a culture of blessing.
So one of the things I'd love to do with you, Dave, we'll figure out when we can do it. But I would love to have more of a deep dive into the culture creation piece, into what it means to train your leaders, equip your leaders, make Bless an integral part of small groups, and then going into each one of those levels, because I know that there's so much more that you've got for us in those areas. So let's do it.
Yeah, there's actually we can even go into the next level. Like there's actually 7 steps that you can take a church through to help them create that model we just described. So that'd be fun.
Okay. All right. We're going to do it. So, all right, listen, we have got a lot of wonderful questions from our audience. So I just wanted to dive in and go right to those. And so at least, let's see, I see at least 10 here or something, just to give you an idea. So we'll try to answer as many as we can. Okay, first question. When you get to the share your story. Mm-hmm. How do you move from talking about sports, family, life in general to spiritual things? Are there leading questions? How do you do this without sounding manipulative?
I would love to hear what your thought is on this too. Okay.
Yeah.
My experience has been that a lot of the time, actually, they'll bring it up. And if you're having to kind of force it, you might be bringing it up too soon. And whoever asked the question, I love your heart, because it was kind of you're probably like me when I was younger, going like, man, I gotta. And I don't think you have to be totally passive and wait for them, but I think if you feel like you're forcing it, then it may just be too soon, because an adult style learning is when you are answering questions that they're asking. Right. And so for us to answer a question they're not asking, we might feel good because, I shared my testimony or I was a witness, but if it's not helping them, then maybe not. What do you think, Michelle?
Yes, I agree with that. And then like my knee-jerk thought with this question is, I will ask questions. So essentially I'll do more listening. I'll start to ask spiritual questions, let them lead. So questions like, hey, I don't know that we've ever talked about, what's your spiritual background? Do you have any kind of religious background? Or, hey, have you had any experience with the church? Just curious, And sometimes people, obviously I'm a pastor, so people have some idea and may have given me some hints about which questions might be interesting to ask. Yeah, and then I find I can kind of gauge their interest in those kinds of conversations when I do that. And they often will ask the same questions back. Oh, well, here's my answer. How about you? Yeah. And then it can go all kinds of places. So that was my knee jerk, is like, I kind of go there by asking questions, spiritual questions, and then seeing where the Spirit leads.
The other thing that comes to mind too, that might be a help to the person asked the question, is I've found that on the serve, the first S, that one of the ways you can all serve, and I've found it not to be offensive, is whenever something comes up, there's a need in someone's own life to go like, hey, can I pray for you?
That's good.
And sometimes you might pray on the spot. Sometimes that's too much for them. But to say, can I pray? And then to remember to follow up because if it was like, or a surgery, a baby, or whatever, they're looking for a job, whatever the thing is going on. Hey, I was praying for you. How's it going with the job search? And that can become that pivot to a more spiritual conversation. Because like sometimes, I mean, the prayers are dramatically answered, and they're going like, yeah, you know what I mean? So I think
I
that
love
can be a
that.
pivot to the kind of the sharing of the story too.
Okay, that's brilliant. And as evangelicals, we don't always remember to invite the Spirit, get the Spirit involved. And so I appreciate that. Okay, all right. So next question. Dave, I love the various practices you've introduced to us in your book, but I imagine there are some things that you've experimented with over the years that didn't work as well as you had hoped. Can you share with us a story that perhaps relates to this and what you learned as a church?
Whoever that person is, very wise. You're right, because like in workshops like this and webinars, we only tell all the great things that happened, right?
Right.
Actually, so in our journey to get to the blessed practices, before we ever kind of put those pieces together, we tried something, and I want to be able to give the specifics, but we tried something called the 2 questions, and there were like 2 questions we wanted everybody to ask on a daily basis. And I remember we had
ask themselves or ask somebody else?
It was ask themselves.
Ask themselves. Okay.
Prompt for what they were going to be about.
Yeah.
And we had our staff team come together with their spouses, and we had them try it for like 3 months. And you could tell, even before the 3 months was over, like it just kind of fizzled out. I had a mentor who said, always invest in things that are wanting to happen. Always invest in things that are wanting. And so when we started with these 5 practices, hey, do one of these every day, and then in your small group, ask each other, who'd you bless this week? It kind of took off, and you could feel like, okay, now this is wanting to happen, as opposed to the other thing where we're, again, well-intentioned, but it felt like we were forcing something, square peg.
That's good. All right. Thank you. All right. Isn't outreach and evangelism modeled differently with youth pastors and adults, and even differently between young adults, say college age, and retired seniors? How do we convey how to do this to our leaders when each has different touchstones? So I'm hearing like, how do we do evangelism and outreach kind of differently depending on the generation or life stage, that kind of thing?
Again, Michelle, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. My experience so far is, there's different generations, but these are kind of some fundamental things that everybody as a Christ follower or just as a person does. Praying, listening, eating, serving, story. I sometimes joke, and I don't think I've mentioned this yet, what you really have here is like a remedial course on how to make friends.
Okay. Yep.
It is. I mean, I'll try another one we didn't practice, Michelle.
Okay.
So what's your husband's name?
Mickey.
Okay. So I'm betting once upon a time when you guys first met that, he was so excited, right? That, listening, right? In conversation, probably one of your first dates was, or early on, was out for breakfast or lunch, or when you get really serious, hey, you want to go to dinner, right? Meal. And then if you gave him any clue about something that you would, like to have happen, or, way that he could express interest or affection or love, he probably acted on it, kind of serving.
That's right.
So I don't think this part is so much generational as it's just how people work. It's like kind of how we're wired by God. So I think the application might be different. So for example, you talked about earlier on, hey, maybe one of the ways that young adults are connecting is maybe they're, instead of being on Zoom, they're on Twitch and they're gaming together. Yeah. Okay. And chances are my dad doesn't even know what Twitch is, right? So it's fine. So I think the application might be different, but I think these practices work across the generations, in my opinion.
It's really good. I would also, another thought that was prompted by your earlier focus on leadership development and working with leaders. I think as you begin to work with leaders in each of these generations, you can talk about, what does this look like for us to do this? Like, how can you imagine doing this yourself? And that kind of came up when we had our children's workers think about, well, gosh, like how can kids bless? Can kids bless? And then they thought about, okay, well, what needs to be adjusted or what's the application? So I think it is a process of exploration, especially with leaders, who are early adopters. How do you imagine doing it, living this out? And, let's tweak it here or there. But yeah, I agree. The practices are applicable across the board. Okay, let's see. In sharing your story, is there a resource that you recommend people learn to take someone through? Like, we're talking about gospel explanations, Good News Club, Wordless Book, The Romans Road, Four Spiritual Laws, right? And so this is getting into when you're ready to actually share the story, what do you recommend?
Oh, I probably don't have a great answer on this one. Now, again, what we did in the book is we gave simple tools for each of the practices. And so, I mean, the simple tool that we gave in the book was kind of this idea that all great stories have at least three components. You kind of have the crisis, and then you have the climax, and then you have the resolution. All great stories have that. So we laid out, hey, a simple tool, and we let people in space to do it, is write out your story so that you know it in that kind of a format. And the crisis would be my life before Jesus. The climax is how I met Jesus. And then the resolution is life since Jesus. So it's really kind of like those three parts. I think that's a really simple, basic way, but where would you point people if you want to do something more work on really your story and really sharpening that?
Oh my goodness, I have so much to say about that. So in the ECC, what we've realized, we actually started out with that as being share your story. And then over time, we changed it to share the story and emphasized both our personal story and then the gospel story, right? And so, there's still a lot of work that we want to do with that. But I would say I'm a big fan these days of ways of sharing the gospel that are like holistic. Um, and I can send this as well in the follow-up email that we do and with the additional resources. But there's a few ways of sharing the gospel, like James Chung, he works for InterVarsity, and he's come up with a way of sharing the gospel that walks people through all of the basics of what Jesus did. But then also, it's not just about your soul getting saved and going to heaven. At the end, it's like be a part of really blessing the world. Be a part of, the creation, the kingdom of God and the recreation of everything. So you're going to be a part of that. And then we're inviting you to go out and bless others as well. And it's a pretty holistic presentation. So I'll put a few of those in terms of like my favorite way of actually sharing the gospel story. There's some really good work being done on that. And someone else asked this question: can you talk more specifically about how to bless in cross-cultural and ethnic across difference? And one of the things I would say is finding holistic ways of sharing the gospel is very powerful because it shows people that you're not just thinking about souls saved, but you're thinking about, the need for new creation, which is often something that we've missed as evangelicals in multi-ethnic contexts.
One of the Scott McKnight's book, King Jesus Gospel, I don't think it really addresses that specifically what you're talking about, the multicultural, but I think it sets a paradigm for understanding the gospel as not just a decision that you made, but really being a part of the overall kingdom. And I think when you really get that, like what you're saying,
Yes.
the kingdom, then all of a sudden it's not just my personal relationship that's at stake. No, I have to make sure this community is okay. And if I'm concerned about the community, then issues of injustice are as important as, like, most evangelicals talk about, oh, my own sin that needs to be righted. No, it's about the community first. We're just a sub part of that. And his understanding of gospels helped me too. So
Amen.
great. Thanks, Michelle.
I'll say just a couple other quick things with regard to the blessing cross-culturally. One of the things we talk about with E is reverse hospitality. We talk about how Jesus really actually invited himself over people's homes But the principle being that when we're trying to cross cultures, it's often really powerful to put yourself in other people's turf, find ways to join their turf, be on their ground, where they're most comfortable. And often that really is an honoring thing across cultures. And to think about ways of doing that. And then someone else said, do you have any experience or advice using Bless with Muslims? It's a very interesting question. I used to work in international student ministry, which included with Crew, which included plenty of work across religious difference. And the one other thing I would say here is that when it comes to blessing across religious difference, the L is critical. The L could not be more critical. Listen, listen, listen. I ask all kinds of questions to show my respect for another person's current religious context. What do you believe? Like, tell me more about why it's meaningful to you. What are your favorite parts of your faith? Like, what really resonates? I mean, from what you know about Christianity, what are the differences, right? And so I've had experience witnessing the Buddhists, witnessing the Muslims, et cetera. And that would be my number one. Know as much as you can about their faith so you can find points of intersection with them in terms of Jesus. You want to add anything, Dave?
No, that's super helpful. That's super helpful. Yeah. To exaggerate and elongate the L of listen in those relationships. That's good.
Okay, that's very good. Okay, we have a few more minutes, a few more questions. This will fit in well with what we're discussing in our church leadership meetings. All right, yay. I would like to get a copy of this webinar to show to my leadership team. How do I do that? Oh, yes, friends, yes. Okay, so listen, we're going to put this right up on the Covenant Church, our Bless website, covchurch.org/bless. We'll also include the recording in the follow-up email. So if you're here, you should just immediately get the recording, and you can easily download it and show it to whoever you like. Awesome. Someone's asked, where do we get a Blessed t-shirt?
I knew it. That was why I asked you.
I have had that question asked several times, and I want to work on that. Right now, we just have them for like the Make and Deepen Disciples team. But hey, if you want a Blessed t-shirt, I'll get you a Blessed t-shirt. So we'll put that on the list. Okay. Here, let me read this. This is a comment from David Robinson, Cannon Beach Community Church. He says, we celebrate Bless every week for 5 months in every Sunday worship service for 3 to 5 minutes per service for 24 weeks every year, January through May. So each month is devoted to one of the letters. January is B, February is L, March is E, April is S, May is S. Wow. This Sunday, we will emphasize Eat Together for the second Sunday of March. We've been doing this for 4 straight years now. So encouraging to hear 5 years in. We are not bored with Bless yet. Dave, you have been such a blessing to us. Thank you for the emphasis and the newly published book. All of our elders are reading it now.
Oh, that's awesome. That is awesome. Awesome. Good for you, David. Thank you.
That's super encouraging, huh? Okay, we have a couple of other questions here about like blessing in a pandemic, etc. We are going to send Dave's chapter on that. Do you have anything to say? This is the final question. Do you have anything to say about our soon-to-be post-COVID culture? And bless in post-COVID. Thoughts, encouragements?
Sure. I'll try to make it brief. Yeah. I think one of the big changes is going to be that we're already seeing happen in the post-COVID culture. Barna did some research that came out recently, and they talked to unchurched or non-Christian people with whom are they most likely to have a conversation about spiritual things, and see if I can remember. But 3 things came to the top. They said, I want to talk to people that'll listen to me, which you highlighted. Thank you. I want to talk to people who will trust me with my own spirit, my own journey, kind of let me make up my own mind. So they're kind of saying, don't treat me like a project. And then thirdly, they're saying, I want to talk to people who are confident about what they believe.
Yes.
I think those things are going to be true, continue to be true. But the other thing that's also going to be on top of that in the post-pandemic world is I think relationships are going to be more important than ever, because I think spiritual interest is high, but I think people for some time are going to be more comfortable in smaller settings, smaller, more relational settings. And I think we'll have opportunities for these kind of conversations. And so I think if we can remember those three things that Barna told us, that unchurched people told us, it's basically, hey, listen to the unchurched people, what they're saying. I think we'll actually have a chance to share the good news with them. So that's what I'd leave them with.
Thank you. And hey, I just remembered this. I remembered as we were preparing for this webinar, you said, hey, I'm willing to connect with people personally. I'm willing. Yes. So what we're doing is we are starting a journey here, a longer term relationship. David's a friend of the ECC. And so if you're a pastor, if you're somebody who is trying to put things in practice, you have ideas, you have questions, Dave is willing to make himself available. So we have an eve address, and hopefully we can get that into the chat, but I'll also put it in the follow-up email. Ah, there it is. Yes. So Dave Ferguson at communitychristian.org. And I'm sure he gets lots of emails, but he has that.
So yeah, that'll come straight to me and my assistant, Pat. And if there's ways that we can help, help you live this out along with what Michelle's doing, we want to do it. We want to partner with you in that cause.
All right, everybody. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. This was a great time. And as I said, we're hoping to do more together with our friends over at Community Christian and New Thing and Exponential. So thanks again. And, keep on being a blessing, friend. Bye-bye.